He thought about how even in real life, just like in manga, there was always a main character surrounded by other supporting characters. If his life were a manga, he would be a mob character. A mob, he explained, referred to characters who were always nearly invisible in the background. He had no complaints about being a mob character, and even thought he truly belonged in the corner of a classroom. Indeed, his seat was the furthest back on the window side. That day, it was his turn for class duty, but he had come in too early. He believed different people had things that suited them as he walked down the hallway. While he entered the classroom, he thought about finishing his duties quickly so he could sleep. When a cheerful voice greeted him, saying good morning, it was Kubo-san sitting by the window, smiling at him. Shiraishi thought to himself that Kubo-san never let him remain invisible. He greeted her awkwardly and hesitant. Kubo-san responded with a teasing smile, noting that he was early as expected from Mr. Class duty that day. Shiraishi reminded her calmly that his seat was this furthest back by the window. Then, addressing Kubo-san directly, he tried to continue asking something, though his words were tentative. Kubo-san looked up at Shiraishi with a cute, expectant expression and asked what it was. Shiraishi, clearly embarrassed, said reluctantly that it was his seat. Shiraishi pointed toward his seat while glancing at Kubo-san, who looked back at him. Kubo-san smiled playfully, with her head on her hand, and replied that she knew. Shiraishi, holding his bag, reacted with wide-eyed surprise and confusion, trying to asking why she was sitting there. Shiraishi, looking flustered and sweating, tried to mentally process Kubo-san's behavior and wondered why she was doing it. Kubo-san Eri wondered if she was an esper and had said as much in his mind. The long-haired girl replied, repeating his thoughts aloud. Shiraishi wondered if she was an esper and had said as much in his mind. The long-haired girl replied, repeating his thoughts aloud, then teased him further, blush, and asked why he thought she had done it, inviting him to guess. He, without emotion, responded that she probably did it simply because she felt like it. The long-haired girl claimed he was wrong, her face puffed up in exaggerated annoyance. The girl stood with her back to him, deep in thought, and wondered if maybe the boy wasn't ready for that question yet. She then turned to him and said with a smile that if he could correctly guess something about her, she would move. She leaned closer and whispered the word skirt. The boy responded with a questioning expression. The girl explained, sitting down with a flustered face, that the challenge was whether under her skirt she was wearing shorts or not. She asked him with a smile if he wanted to give it a try. As the boy faced the girl, he saw under her skirt. His mind was in turmoil, repeating to himself the words under her skirt. With the pressure mounting, the boy stood tense and silent. Internally, he panicked, quickly rationalizing that the girl must be wearing shorts and wondering in panic if she wasn't. He managed to mumble an answer, and the girl goaded him, saying, "I can't hear you." She added that if he was wrong, he had to do one thing she told him to. If he was right, she would do one thing he wanted her to do. The boy finally shouted his answer, saying she was wearing some. The girl stood up and responded calmly, saying it was fine with her. Then asked if it was okay with him. Akashi was still stunned, thinking about what that meant. He wondered why she was so confident, and whether it meant that she actually wasn't wearing any shorts. The boy internally screamed. He thought he couldn't possibly ask if she was not wearing anything beneath. That the girl stood up now, with a solemn face. She smiled, grabbed the hem of her skirt, and said that the answer was. The girl with long hair in sailor uniform stood in front of the boy in black uniform and grabbed her skirt, about to lift it up. He stared with a blank face, unsure of what was happening. She blushed deeply, thinking this was it. He thought it wasn't something he could just look at, and his face filled with panic. He flinched and turned around. The girl with long hair in sailor uniform stood with a smile, then lifted her skirt to reveal shorts underneath, her expression playful and lighthearted. She turned to him with a warm, amused smile, saying he got her, admitting it had been a prank. Walking back to her seat, she left the boy in black uniform silent and still, heart pounding so hard it sounded like a drum in his ears. The girl with long hair in sailor uniform sat down at her desk with a relaxed sigh and casually said it was a shame. Then the girl with long hair in sailor uniform had an expression of wonder. Suddenly, her face flushed and her eyes widened as the boy in black uniform abruptly reacted and sat down quickly. Shiraishi sat back at his desk, still feeling the warmth from the girl's seat. and thought his own seat was fine. The girl with long hair and a sailor uniform, on the other hand, said her seat was really cold, embarrassing Shiraishi, who thought that was to be expected. At that moment, she had turned to him with a smile. The girl smilingly reminded him that she had been sitting there the whole time. The boy with dark hair looked surprised. As she smiled with a blush, he noted to himself that she always smiled at him like that. Switching the topic, he asked if she needed to pick up the class logbook. Standing up, he agreed and called his name. He turned back. The girl smiled with a mischievous and teasing expression, her lips curling into a grin, and reminded him about what he wanted her to do. He turned back to her, dragging his hand against the door, and said, "Okay." The girl was seen from behind, sitting at her desk alone. She exclaimed with a soft jet. Her face then turned red, as she thought that Shiraishi-kun was very cute. As the boy with dark hair walked through the bustling school corridors, observing groups of students chattering and teachers passing by, he tried to process what had happened. His face burned with embarrassment as he thought about how close he had come to showing an unmobile expression. He worried if his reaction had seemed strange, and admitted to himself that it felt like his heart was going to burst out of his chest. Mentally, he scolded himself, telling himself to get it together and reminding that he was supposed to be the mob of mobs. He worried that being around Kubo-san made him feel like losing the mobness inside him, which he found troubling. Typically, he thought, even if he said something that might draw attention, it was rare for his face to actually be seen. A teacher was shown angrily scolding a student for sleeping in class, hitting him with a loud smack, while another student with black hair sat quietly in the background. Shiraishi mentioned that he was never caught sleeping during class, suggesting a sense of detachment. The scene shifted to Shiraishi himself napping with his eyes open, explaining that on top of everything he slept with his eyes open. Sleeping with his eyes open reinforced the idea that he went unnoticed, even when breaking rules. The teacher then collected everyone's worksheets, believing he had them all, and praising the class for not forgetting to turn in their work. It was shown that someone had turned in a worksheet labeled worksheet with an arrow pointing to it. Shiraishi meanwhile looked at his worksheet and thought in a resigned manner that he was forgotten. He reflected that he simply had no presence, both in good and bad ways. Shiraishi accepted this reality without bitterness, thinking that being a mob was just how things were. To him, it wasn't a matter of being pessimistic. It was simply who he was, nothing more than that. With a resigned face, he glanced toward Kubo-san, seated in front of him, telling himself that once school ended, she would likely forget everything that had happened that morning. Later, the teacher had announced that the material on the worksheet would appear on the test, and hoped everyone had taken notes. Realizing his mistake, Shiraishi saw that his own notebook was completely blank. He recalled that he'd been sleeping during class and forgetting to jot anything down, resignation washing over his face. Resigned, Shiraishi decided to head home and stood up to leave, when suddenly Kubo appeared in front of him, asking if he had made a decision. To his shock, she said she never forgot things, making him sweaty and tense. With a gloomy face, she asked if he had forgotten, and he quickly denied it, nervously stammering. Kubo then reminded him about the notes. Close-up showed Shiraishi-kun with a nervous smile and sweat drops on his cheeks. Looking anxious and hesitant, he said he'd like to borrow someone's math notes that day, repeating uncertainly that he thought so. Kubo-san appeared in close-up, looking a little surprised. She asked calmly if he was really okay with just that. The scene shifted to show Kubo-san standing while Shiraishi-kun, still seated, looked away. She said she saw and confirmed it was perfectly fine. Standing over Shiraishi-kun, Kubo-san commented that his facial expressions didn't really change. With his face barely altered, Shiraishi-kun replied perhaps it was true. Looking down at her, he said that, when talking to her, it didn't really feel that way. Shiraishi-kun, standing stiffly with his back mostly to her, said he was certain that Kubo-san was the only one who felt that way. Thinking that no one else even talked to a mob like him anyway, Kubo-san quietly repeated that it really was just her Thayan before falling silent. Shiraishi-kun, noticing her reaction, called her name, and she turned to him with a curious look, asking what exactly that meant. Did it mean that his expression really changed only when he was talking to her? Shiraishi-kun, awkward and flustered, admitted it was possible to interpret it that way. Shiraishi-kun brokenly began to clarify that he hadn't meant anything weird, but stopped, thinking that even that sounded suspicious. Suddenly, Kubo-san had yanked him back to her notebook. With the notes now in his hands, Shiraishi quickly gathered them and stood up, announcing awkwardly that he would take back his notes the following day. He hurried away, desperate to escape the situation. Seeing Kubo walking toward the door, he called out Kubo, hesitating as he tried to find the right words. Kubo turned back with a gentle smile, told him she would see him tomorrow, and waved. He watched her go, thinking, bye, later. He reflected quietly that he was just a mob, while he told himself that he shouldn't make any more reactions than necessary, and that his face ought to be copy-pasted. In his heart, he admitted, I know all of that. Shiraishi-kun thought about his expression. He was glad that no one was looking at his face at that moment. A scene at the door showed Kubo-san with an embarrassed face, saying that she knew all of that.